Hey, it's Adam here, and you're watching The Culture Hack, where we're talking about how to create engaged workspaces that unlock the potential of your teams and drive your business forward in ways you've never seen. So stay tuned. Hello, welcome to The Culture Hack. I'm here with Rob Leone. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Adam. Happy to be here today.
I'm pretty excited. Rob is the co-founder of Black River Performance Management. And we're going to do a little bit of a longer chat today because we really want to get into some technical topics of performance and all this kind of stuff. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about Black River.
Sure. Black River, we are out of Idaho, so we're south of the border. And my wife and I founded it, and we work with organizations throughout, actually around the world now. And our motto is work should fuel the human spirit, not drain it. And so everything we do is focused around trying to help cultivate human flourishing, joy, creating leader success and organizational performance, but not at the expense of the individuals, right? Like, so the idea is I want people to go home feeling good at the end of the day. Like their fuel tank of energy, enthusiasm, still filled enough that they're present with their loved ones or present with, you know, if they want to volunteer or hit the gym, those things that are important to us outside of work, right? I've seen too many people, and I've been one of them over the years, where life just work just kind of sucks it out of you at times. And so we're trying to mitigate that so that people can really love their life and love their work as best as they can, at least at that point for work.
Good. Okay. Well, I mean, that sounds pretty fantastic. Like, I want that, right?
Yeah, I know, right?
Who doesn't? Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess then the magic question is, right? Like, how do we do that? Where do we start?
Yeah. So can I give a little bit of background here? Like, so when you and I chatted, I was like, Adam, get this woman on, and she talked about a concept. And as she was talking about her podcast, and I was like, I think we should go deeper in that concept. And I don't recall her name, but she was talking about self-determination theory. And self-determination theory is this massive mega theory comprised of various sub-theories. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at self-determination theory, which is actually a theory about motivation and human thriving. And so what we want to do is look at what really are those three elements of self-determination theory and how do those impact motivation. And so if you're fine with me jumping into it, I'll give you a little bit of kind of a soapbox real quick about motivation, right?
Okay.
So
I'm ready.
The idea is, so we all know motivation is either intrinsic or extrinsic, right? We've talked about this forever, and we haven't really veered from that too much, right? And when we make anything binary like that, just think of it as the concept of black and white, right? There's so much gray in life. It's just not either or, right? So what we've done is we've built some models and tools based off the research around motivation to help people better understand how to navigate that space. What can you really do? Like, you as an owner of a business, you have discretion over incentives, extrinsic rewards, things like that for employees. But most people in most organizations don't, right? So think back to when you were just a member of a team and you might have been a leader of a team. You had very little influence over annual bonuses, hourly rate of pay, salary, things like that. And so the concept of extrinsic motivation is a really, it's a concept, but it's not helpful to most of us out there because it's just some space that we can't really work within. But then when we step back, we actually learn and look at this, that extrinsic motivation is actually non-sustainable. What happens with the human condition is we'll step up for an incentive or a reward, and then we plateau once we get that, or once it's removed, we slide back down. Even when it's still there, if it's not continually pushing up, for most people, they'll step up and they like, oh yeah, I'll do a 20% pay raise, salary raise, so I can, do the work of this person that just left the organization, right? So I'm willing to do their work for 20% more. Okay, so I'm enthusiastic. I got an extra 20% in my paycheck. I'm going to do their work. I'm doing a good job. But then at some point, and this is just a human condition, we're like, this isn't fun anymore. I'm not enjoying this. I think I need a little bit more money, right? So if you ever think about it, think about uh, ever hear people say, I don't get paid enough for this, right? It's somewhat of a symptom of an element of motivation. It's also a symptom of an element of psychological safety. That's something else to get into at a different point. But my point here is that we adjust over time. Think about it. When you take your first job, you think about first job right out of college, right? You and me both. It was enough money, right? Like we were able to pay for a car to get to work and maybe an apartment or something, and we were able to live with this. And compared to what we were making in college, this was really awesome. But over time, right? Life changes. You like to eat out a little bit more, maybe buy a boat. All these things change, right? So on the onset, the funds were sufficient for us to take this job. But over time, things happen. Maybe you add a family member or something, and now the resources are not enough. And that's just natural. And that's why we evolve and we move into new jobs and we look for promotions and new opportunities, right? So the concept of money is a real tricky concept. The general concept is if we pay them enough, we remove the element of finances off of the table as it relates to motivation. So the other side of this is intrinsic. And I think most people are well versed in intrinsic. Those are the things that move us, that lead us to do what we do. And there's a variety of reasons that we're intrinsically motivated. And so, but we're not always good at cultivating that in other people, right? So I think about motivation as an entirely internal process. So I can't motivate you, Adam. All I can do is help move things out of your way and cultivate more things that feed your motivation, that feed the stuff that you're looking for. So once we look at it from that point of view, we have this really unhelpful binary model of either intrinsic or extrinsic. Most people don't know what to do with the intrinsic part as it relates to their team or others. So they often resort to extrinsic, but they don't have a whole lot of ability to influence that, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the 3 basic psychological needs. And so let me set this up real quick. If you look at motivation, it's one of these sexy topics in organizations, right? Everyone wants to know more about motivation and how to motivate people more. In fact, it's in the top 5 of keynote speeches worldwide is the topic of motivation. But, because it's such a popular topic in the mainstream, it also has a lot of different meanings to different people. And one of the things we struggle with is language. Your version of motivation, your belief, is most likely different than my belief. And then if you think about that, if we're on a team of 20, what does that mean? How does that look like, right? So language is challenging. And so what we're trying to do here is kind of demystify the motivation puzzle here by focusing on some things that are very specific. So there's a lot of different assessments, tools, people talking about motivation, books talking about motivation. And in many instances, they're looking at things that kind of excite interest in people, right? They're trying to, what are the things that will help you become more intrinsically motivated? And for some people, it's rewards, which is external, by the way. Some people, it's meaningful work. Some people, it's to be in a role of power and influence. Other people, is learning, something as simple as learning. I'm motivated to learn. Well, when we look at self-determination theory, it doesn't quite fit those frameworks. And so what I do here with my students and my clients is I say, let's have a hard pause right now and start to differentiate these things. Because the more we clarify what we mean, I think the better we can make it actionable and work through it, right? So at this point, I say, let's just take all those other things that I just mentioned, such as meaningful work, learning, power, things like that, and let's just set those aside for now. And let's just consider those preferences, not motivators or motives. Essentially, they are motives, but what we're doing is we're muddying the water in terms of navigating motivation if we encompass everything we're about to talk about here. And we don't serve our staff well either. Let's just set those aside as preferences. Now let's look at the basic psychological needs that you talked about in one of your previous episodes. So there's 3 basic psychological needs. And if you think about Maslow's hierarchy, if people can visualize at least the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which basically says as you fulfill foundational needs, you move up a level to more sophisticated needs, up a level to eventually self-actualization. Well, the work of self-determination theory and these basic psychological needs actually puts a tweak or spin on Maslow's hierarchy. And this is what it's about. So there's three basic psychological needs. They are competence, which is the ability to do the job correctly, consistently. Autonomy, which is independence or agency over your work or your space or your life. And relatedness, which is another term for connection, right? That relatedness factor, connecting with people, having meaningful relationships are important to our basic psychological needs. So if you take those three basic elements, those are actually true for all organisms that exist. Without those three elements, no organism would thrive and reproduce and grow and offspring, things like that. So what do these things really mean? So what I do is, keeping those preferences aside, let's talk about motivation from a needs-based approach. And now let's apply that concept of needs to those three basic psychological needs. So what I'm talking about here is that if I am not fulfilled in any one or several of those three basic psychological needs, I might not be able to move up in the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy. So I might not be able to move from food and shelter, physiological needs, into, social needs, then into like purpose and things like that. Because if I don't have food or shelter, I am probably not that interested in what's going on around me in life in general, right? You think about it, if you have a staff that you're bringing to training or just day-to-day work, and one of those staff members is, housing or food insecure, they're not sure how they're going to provide for their family that night, that makes it very difficult for them to be concerned with the training that's going on. Even though from a leadership point of view, we're like, well, you need to know this training because this will help you keep your job so you could continue to live. It's very power oriented, that statement, and it doesn't serve people well. So what I talk about is we need to help people better understand that some of our people at times are struggling. And we've all been there, right? Like, we've all had challenges that really at a foundational level have challenged us. So what we've done is we've developed a couple models that looks at this in a little bit more detail. And so what I do is I work with leaders and then eventually work with the staff to develop this language around this motivation framework. And if you think about it, competency, autonomy, and relatedness spell CAR, C-A-R. And so what we do is, if someone's missing the marks, if someone's not performing, perhaps they're showing up late consistently, or the accuracy, their reports have diminished, or they're dropping the ball and they're letting the team down. What I do is I encourage leaders to work with those people to determine what's going on, just as most of us would. Some leaders are a little bit more charismatic at that, and some leaders are a little bit more authoritarian, like, you just need to get this together and get it done and fix it, right? What we're trying to do is cultivate cultures of compassion, vulnerability, support, so that people can love their work and love who they work with. So when it comes to troubleshooting a performance issue, this is where we bring in this CAR concept. So if I have an employee that's underperforming, I check their CAR. And what does that mean? I check their level of competence, their level of autonomy, and their level of relatedness as it relates to what's going on in their life. Now, what's the difference between CAR at home versus CAR at work? Well, as nice as the concept is that we just need to check everything at the door when we enter the office for the day, the reality is that we're much more complicated, right? And emotions pass through the door and things happen and life interrupts and things like that. So what we do is we say, look, you want to check their CAR at work first, because we want to determine maybe the poor performance relates to a software change that's diminished their level of competence. Maybe it's related to some team dynamics, some drama, or a hire of a new leader that's micromanaging and removing their autonomy. So I'll give you a story as an example here. I had a client once that reached out and said, Gloria's not performing. And I don't know what to do with her. I think it might be time to get rid of her. I said, okay, well, let's talk about this. Did you check her car? Because we've been working for years together. She's like, yeah, I checked her car. And it's she's just not doing the work. So it's not working out. I said, okay, well, let's just check her car together. And said, let's start with C, competence. Is she competent in her job? And she said, no, she's not competent in her job. And that's why we need to get rid of her. I said, okay, well, how long has she been here? She's been here for 2 years. Oh, okay, 2 years. So she's been working with you or for you for 2 years and she's never been competent? And the person's like, no. She was competent 6 months in. She was killing it. She was, she really grasped the material. She was doing the work. She was helping others. She was actually training people, but she's not doing it anymore. I said, well, with all due respect, that doesn't mean that she's not competent anymore, right? Something's happened, right? You don't become uncompetent or incompetent after you've already mastered it. It's kind of like the riding the bike analogy, right? Once you learn how to ride a bike, you kind of got it. And so we can't say that unless there's two different variables I look at. Unless there's something like actually like a traumatic head injury that actually changes, the mental wiring of something, which then makes sense that, okay, we might be dealing with something here. Or there's a system change. Think about when you work with an organization and they went to a new software program. You might have been fully competent and good on it before, but now you've moved to this new program. Of course, you have to start all over with it. But for her, for this situation, it was neither of those. I said, okay, well, let's go over to autonomy. Let's see what's going on. So have you hired someone new over her that maybe is micromanaging, or has the scope of the work shifted in a way that even though she has the expertise, you're not letting her do the work the way she can or is capable of? She said, no, nothing's changed there. I said, okay, well, let's go over to the R, relatedness. What's going on with the team? Are there new team members, new dynamics, maybe some team drama, something like that? She's like, nope, nothing's changed there. It's all the same. Well, you could. I hope you could see that if we would have brought in a new manager and they would have been micromanaging Gloria, right? So she was fully competent and now they're overbearing. That could lead to performance issues, right? We know that people don't like micromanagement. Micromanagement in general, when someone's fully competent, is a bad thing because it diminishes autonomy, which therefore eventually erodes the motivation. So it was none of those three factors. So what should we do now? Well, I said, well, let's talk about her car at home. Did you check her car at home? And the leader's like, no, I don't talk about home life stuff with people. I don't do happy hours. I don't do lunches. It's their business. I'm the CEO. We're different. Like, it's like, okay, I understand that. I get where you're coming from. Not the way I roll, but I said, I need you to talk to her about her car at home. She's like, no, I'm not comfortable doing it. I said, all you need to do is just open the door for her and just make it an option to share. If she's comfortable, you don't need to pry. It's not about that, right? Because if we pause this conversation, you step back, they've been having these frequent check-ins over time saying, you didn't hit your marks again. You need to do better. You didn't hit your marks again. You need to do better. You didn't hit your marks again. I need you to step it up, right? So they've had these interactions. So there's grounds for this nice, natural conversation about their home life car, right? So she's like, okay, I'll give it a try. So just call me later. Let me know how it goes. She calls me back. She's like, Robbie, you wouldn't even believe this, like what happened here. I asked her if everything was okay at home, and then it just all came out. And I learned so much, and there's so much dis-ease and kind of instability at home that now it makes sense to me why she can't focus on her work and to do the work she's done historically well. So, well, what'd you find out? She said, well, her live-at-home daughter is pregnant now. So that, arguably could be eroding her sense of competence as a mother. She is at odds with her husband. They're fighting, a lot of conflict. So you could see how that can erode her relatedness with her husband, right? That level of connection there. And then her mother-in-law is moving in on top of that. And and so there goes the autonomy factor, right? And whether or not it truly fits the model, it's a perfect example of things that occur in our life that erode kind of our foundation, that send us backwards, and we go back into building block stage, right? And so that's how we use that CAR framework with our clients. Like I said, and my students too. We start with introducing the 3 basic psychological needs, explain their relevance, help people understand that they themselves possess those needs, as well as their people. So their people are not different from them, right? And then from there, we have them start to look at applying it in their own personal life. So navigating your own car is a great way to determine why you are or you're not firing on all cylinders, right? You know what I'm talking about. We have times in life we just feel like a funk. It just doesn't feel good. Something's going on. So if we actually learn how to check our car both at work and at home, it's actually quite revealing in terms of, now I have an aspect of self-leadership here over navigating my experiences. Maybe I need to talk to someone in my personal life, or maybe I need to talk to someone in my professional life to work through this, right? So we use that, and what we do know is that the transfer, say training transfer at work to work practice, is enhanced if we could scaffold it with transfer to home life first, which is an interesting concept. So in order for me, let's just make this assumption, Adam, that I'm your supervisor and I'm learning this. In order for me to do this with you and help you with this, because we're just colleagues at this point, I need to start with, say, people in my immediate social life or home life, because I can connect with them better. I understand their dynamics. I have more confidence and comfort with that to start building that skill. And then it'll translate or transfer into the workplace. So that's the CAR framework that we talk about. Any questions? Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I was just thinking, from my own experience, like let's say there is a performance issue and it's due to relatedness at the workplace, right? Maybe it's between you and your boss or you and your colleague or whatever. So what do many leaders, organizations do? They push on the autonomy and they start micromanaging you, right? So
yeah, I know, right?
You've got you're short one, and now you're gonna remove the other, right? So we hit the wrong, like we're just pulling chair legs out, right?
Yeah. That relatedness is an interesting factor too, right? Because another thing that organizations sometimes do is they're like, hey, let's have mandatory fun time or popcorn and beer every Friday. Everyone has to attend and stuff like that. And this needs to be much more natural than a one size fits all model. And actually the concept of relatedness is super interesting in that it's really fluid between work and home. So some people have great relatedness at home. They have a strong social network. They have a strong family network, and they don't quite need the same level of relatedness fill at the office. Whereas the reverse is true, which we heard at COVID, is like people really missed, being at work with that's their friendship group for many people. And so that was missing for them. And so the interesting thing is that we just have to navigate that space very carefully, and it has to also be somewhat by their terms. It can't be like, hey, look, I know what we can do. We can have fun, and let me create fun for you. Like fun's rarely created by someone else and given to you, right? Like, yeah, there has to be a level of openness and engagement in it, right? So one of the things I talk about, because this concept of relatedness is important, as I think about my wife even, and we have this conversation regularly. I can't fill her cup with all her needs. She needs her girlfriends. She needs other people in her life with common shared nuanced interests that she has, so that she can have those experiences filled. And so things happen in people's lives and relationships erode. And all of a sudden you could have someone in your office, let's just say it's Tom, is in your office. He never, there's a group of us, Adam, you, me, a couple other people. We like to do Friday happy hour. We have good friendship at work, right? And Tom never shows up. right? And so we're like, well, Tom's got family, he's got a lot going on, he's happy, it works. And so we stop inviting him, right? So we just keep doing it, but little do we know that things at home have eroded for him, and he really needed to spend some time with some people that actually respected and cared for him, right? So it's a real complicated factor out of these. Competence is pretty clean, autonomy is pretty clean, but the relatedness is really soupy, sloppy.
Yeah, totally. So quick story, I worked with a company, same thing, started a little bit of a social club, tried to hold some whatever Friday, come have some cookies, events and things like that. And
Yeah,
at first no one showed up, and then more and more people started to poke their heads in, but there was one guy that never came no matter what.
yeah,
And you tried to involve him. What kind of stuff are you interested in? Could we maybe design one that's like specific? No, fine, whatever. So like, all right, just doesn't care, whatever. Then one day he comes into my office and he says, Adam, I just have to tell you, I'm so glad that you're putting on these events. It's been amazing for the office. I just love it. And I was like, cool. Are you going to come to the next one? And he said, oh God, no.
that's perfect.
But I was like, it was fueling. The fact that he was invited and that it was happening was enough for him. And he was good. Right?
Yeah.
And I just always remember that, because just because he's not coming doesn't mean he's not happy that it's happening. Right?
Yeah, one size fits all never works, right? Like, and so to have that, and the same thing in leadership too. Your needs are different than the next person's needs, and our rapport is different. We're going to be equitable. I'm going to give everyone the same amount of energy as I supervise and lead them. But I'm not going to cookie cutter each of you and say, this is how I talk to Adam. This is how I talk to Tom. This is how, like, as in the exact same piece. You and I might have connections because of, where we went to college. Tom and I might have connections based on hobbies. You know what I mean? Like that. So knowing the person is super powerful in building stronger connections, to your point, like among the team, but also as a leader to support people. As you talk through these difficult things, right? Like, it's hard to have a conversation about someone's competence, autonomy, or relatedness at work and at home if I've been very distant and just matter of fact with the person. Why should I expect you to open up to me if I've always held you kind of at arm's length and never took the time to get to know you? And to your point about that other guy at the office, some people's get to know you is very different than others. So the cookie cutter approach really doesn't work for everyone. You got to know them for who they are and where they're at.
Well, and I've also had it where someone that's worked for me have given like, oh, here's lots of autonomy, here more autonomy, more autonomy, more autonomy, and the results were not good. Performance issues. And then now that I'm thinking it in terms of your model, it's because competency wasn't there. So by feeding the wrong one, right?
Yeah.
It just caused more problems. I was feeding the wrong, which, was something I'd done with other people that worked really well, right? So,
I'm super sensitive to that. If I could talk on that real quick. Micromanagement's an interesting thing, right? So the concept of micromanagement is, first off, everyone is turned off by it. They push back. Mind you, they still do it. And not everyone micromanages, but my point here is that it's a factor of misalignment of needs, right? Micromanagement is based on the fact that someone has the competence, but we're handling them like they don't have the competence, and we're diminishing their autonomy, right? But to your point, just the point you just made right now is so perfect that some people need to have less autonomy, actually. More of this healthy form of micromanagement I talk about. I need to up my oversight. Adam, I just hire you. You're new. You have your skills. You have your background, your craft, right? But you've never worked for our organization. You've never worked with this team. You might not have worked on policies or processes like ours. You might not have worked on software like ours. So the fact that you got the job does not mean you're competent. It means you're ready for the job. And from there, that's where leaders really misstep, is that they're like, hey, Adam, here's your nameplate, your keys. You got this. I believe in you. And the reality is that you got some of it, but you do need some onboarding. You do need some structure. You can't be cut loose necessarily. Um, we hear these people say, hey, you need more autonomy. You need to give your people more autonomy to give them engagement. Well, just to your point there, that's actually really dangerous because not everyone needs more autonomy. Some people need more handholding and role modeling and demonstration so they build the competence factor. And then once they've demonstrated they're competent, then the autonomy is granted, right? So it's super complicated. I talk to my students about this often. I was like, now that you know all of this, don't you wish you'd never learned any of this? Because now you really have no clue what you're doing. Like, there's just so many other variables out there.
Yeah. There's definitely an intuition to it.
Yeah. Right. So, do you want to talk about the other factor, the other framework?
Sure. Hit me.
Okay. Okay. So I'll try to make this quick. I know we're blowing the time on your quick and neat podcast. So. So our model is actually a dashboard of a car. And so what you have is you have CAR to the right, which looks like fuel levels essentially. And so that's how we talk about it to our people. Then on the left, we have a speedometer looking thing that has 4 different factors. And it has 2 of the factors we talked about already, which is extrinsic and intrinsic. So this is that binary model that I started with that's problematic. So the problem with those 2 things, as I mentioned, is that they're really difficult to maneuver, and if they really are either or, it's an oversimplification of leadership. So what am I talking about here? That's 2 of the 4 factors. So on the far right would be intrinsic, on the far left would be extrinsic. So what's happening between those 2 ends of the continuum? Let's think of it more as a continuum. Well, there's 2 different factors in there. And the one that's closest to extrinsic is called imposed. And the idea here is that it's closer to, it's starting to move away from extrinsic, but it's still highly externally oriented, which means in the case of applying it in a workplace, that the leader is potentially imposing information on you, like, Adam, I need you to do this. This is what you're going to do. Or don't do this, do this. As opposed to trying to cultivate the information so that you're more intrinsically motivated to do the work, right? So my favorite example is just high school kid, right? When I was in high school, parents told me, do this, don't hang out with those people, don't do that to your hair, all these different like impositions. And you think about it, what do people do when they're in high school, when they're filled with impositions? They do exactly what they're told not to do, right? Don't go out with those friends tonight. Well, I'm taking the car and I'm going right now, right? Like it's just the way people function. We know that imposition is a demotivator. Advice, if it's not requested, has been consistently tied to diminished levels of motivation. We give advice all the time, unsolicited, and we don't realize that we're actually doing harm to the person we're advising. So if the person says, Adam, or if I say, Adam, can you give me some advice? That means my mindset is open and I'm willing to hear what you have to say because I'm ready for it now. But if I didn't ask for that and you give me your advice, there's a good chance that the levels of intrinsic motivation are dipping because of that. So this imposition phase is really like the advice giving phase. It's what we do a lot in organizations. This is a lot more telling and talking at people as opposed to engaging in a conversation with them. Why do we do this? It's fast and easy, right? And when you think about advice, we do it from the goodness of our heart, right? Like, hey, I earned my lumps. I don't want you to make the same mistakes as I did. Do this, don't do what I did. It only works out if they're interested and willing and wanting that advice. So think of it the same way in the workplace. If I'm really imposing information on my team, instead of having a conversation with them, it's gonna diminish their motivation more than having a conversation with them. So we go from extrinsic to imposed to aligned and then intrinsic. And aligned is much more internally oriented phenomenon. The idea here is that I slow things down and I get you on board. So Adam, I might have something I need you to do, and I could just say, Adam, I need you to do this. And sometimes you might be like, cool, I'll do it. Other times you might be like, man, that rubbed me the wrong way. I'm not feeling it right now. So, because it's all externally oriented, what we're trying to do in the aligned as we get closer to intrinsic is we're trying, and I know I can just think of the audience listening and being like, what the heck's going on with all these factors, right? So we're moving more towards internalized intrinsic motivation. And so aligned means, Adam, I know you might not understand what this is about, but let's have a conversation. I'll explain it to you, and you ask me whatever questions you have. Because what I want to do with this task that I have to give you is have you want to own it and run with it. At face value, you might not recognize its value or the importance or significance, but after I have this conversation with you and answer your questions and hear you out, I pique your internal motivation, I pique your intrinsic motivation, and then all of a sudden now you're a little bit more on board. You have buy-in now at this point, right? When we're told things, we don't have buy-in necessarily, unless it's something that we truly wanted to occur. But in many instances, we don't have buy-in when we're saying, this is what's going to happen. It's the same thing when we go through a change initiative, right? Buy-in's important. How do we get buy-in? We involve people in the process. We align them with the desired outcome, and then that's where buy-in occurs. So to recap, essentially, is that our most extrinsic oriented category is extrinsic. From there is imposed, which means that it's still externally oriented. The stimulus is coming from outside to tell you what to do. Then we go to aligned, that while that stimulus is coming from the outside, it's delivered in a manner that essentially warms you up and engages you. And then from there, we have intrinsic motivation. And what often happens with people in that aligned category, once they get it and they feel it and they get kind of they get their sea legs essentially, then that's enough to fuel that intrinsic motivation. And then they're happy to run with things and they do great things. We just need to get out of their way and be there and give them some support when they need support. So there's the quick and dirty of that.
Okay. No, I love it. I mean, you can see how much information there is to consider, right? You no wonder people struggle with this, right? Whether it's at home or in the office and all that kind of stuff. And work in progress, right? Like I said, it might have been super successful with the first 5 people, but the 6th person totally failed. And okay, great. We'll just keep working on it together, right? That's absolutely progress, perfection, right? Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Well, Rob, this has been a fantastic. It's like a masterclass here live on the Culture Hack. I'm super excited about this. Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Adam. This was great, and happy to share with you. Fantastic. Well, appreciate your time, Rob.
Hey, thanks for watching the Culture Hack. Do you want to chat culture and engagement? Give us a call and come on the show.